welcome back to Konstantinovsk and the year 1980. It's the moment that a few of you, maybe one or two of you, have been waiting for. We finally got round to doing the Board of Honours. And I thought I'd front load the episode with this because, first of all, I'm pretty proud of how it turned out. I was basing it off of a real-life Board of Honours from Kaliningrad, as you'll be able to see in this photo here. Plus, I want to get the honour roll done before the viewership drops off halfway through the episode. And that's not me being bitter, by the way. That's just a fact of life. That's just how things go when you're doing YouTube videos, isn't it? Plus, I do have a sort of no complaining rule for myself when I'm doing these videos. So no talking about technical issues, no talking about YouTube issues or anything like that. But that does mean I am relying on you guys to pull me up on it anytime you hear any rubbish from me. And who knows, it might just get you a place on the Board of Honours. You will notice also I'm putting up a couple of real-life Kaliningraders on the Board of Honours here as well. So Alexei Leonov and Yuri Romanenko, two of Kaliningrad's cosmonauts, are honoured on this board, as well as the twin brothers Sergei and Anatoly Beloglazov, who were Olympic wrestlers in 1980. I'll also be putting up the portraits of Konstantin Rokossovsky, the namesake of this city in our timeline, and Vasily Petrov, who was a marshal of the Soviet Union. Even though neither of them were Kaliningraders, at the time I just did it because I thought I would need to make up the space on this thing, but as it turns out, I'm actually running out of space, so I might actually make a separate board for real-life historical figures of importance, as well as this one for the, equally real-life contributors to our little community we got going on this channel. So it's time to do the roll call for the Board of Honours, and I'm going to leave out the historical figures in this reading. So thank you to Roman B, Tiziano Guerra Kirikos, Domi the Socialist, Frank Meyer, Chris Brammer, who has distinguished himself by creating so many of the models that are unique to this city, Zdravko Dubravec, Z-Green Gaming, who is a hero of socialist education for giving me so many helpful hints and tips, Jutland, LCD IBZ, Cortonide, I see you there, Jordan, Llama Daisy. Thank you all so much. Now let's get on with the episode. To start with today, we're building a big marketplace. Now, you can't really talk about markets in the Soviet Union without talking about the notorious second economy. And if you want to know what that means, it's basically like this.
No income tax, no VAT, no money back, no guarantee.
You get the gist. We're talking about black market goods, untraceable transactions, tax-free, things like that. Call it the black market, call it wheeling and dealing, call it bootlegging. It happens in every country in the world. It makes up roughly 10% of the global workforce. And the point is, this would be a hotbed for this kind of activity in Konstantinovsk. Anyway, on screen right now, I'm building a sort of replica of the Hauster technique. It's at the time it was a bombed-out building from the Königsberg era, part of the Eastern Fair that I've mentioned in previous episodes. In Konstantinovsk, the Hauster technique is going to remain in the state of disrepair, much as it did in Kaliningrad up until the 1990s. And it's going to be part of the site of the central market. Mainly it's going to sit next to the main buildings of the central market, which will be represented by a series of market halls that I'm going to place down shortly. But from a practical standpoint of what I'm actually doing, I'm using the Hanomag hall by Evametry on the workshop, turned it into procedural objects and just squashed it down so it has this open roof look, to make it look as though it's been bombed out, basically. Anyway, these are the market halls that I'm putting down to represent the sort of centre of the marketplace. And I'll be surrounding that with little market stalls for all of the Del Boys of Konstantinovsk to sell their wares. now we're getting to work on Chernyakov Street, seen here in the middle of a bad auto accident, I think. And Chernyakov Street makes up the northwestern part of the inner ring road of Kaliningrad and therefore Konstantinovsk. And these buildings, these sort of pale, low-rise buildings, are the ones that line the street at the southern end of the central marketplace. And you can see here I'm about to start laying down some infrastructure, some roads for the surrounding housing projects. I'm not going to show most of that build, to be honest, here. I think it can get a little bit repetitive just placing down big blocks of housing and things like that. So for this episode, and probably ongoing, I'm going to keep what goes on camera pretty well focused on the focal points of the build. And you can see here I'm doing the eastern entrance to the marketplace, and I wanted to keep this whole area kind of chaotic, a little bit disordered, ramshackle, sort of thrown together, rather than the more orderly parts of the city that you more typically sort of see in Soviet cities. Again, what I'm going for is a sense of realism at ground level. So maybe from above it looks a little bit odd, but when you're down on the ground, it looks kind of like a real live, bustling marketplace. And I'm taking some inspiration, not just from how it was in the 1980s, but also how it is in modern day. So you'll see these buildings here that I'm placing down. They're more modern additions to the central market in Kaliningrad. They're coming in a bit early for Konstantinovsk. And you'll see very shortly the western entrance to the marketplace is very much inspired by the modern day Kaliningrad. So what I'm doing with these curved roof props here is I'm trying to give the impression that the market has expanded over time, and so these more modern looking parts of it are more recent expansions outwards from the central market hall that you can see is quite a lot older looking. And here I'm doing the entrance on the western edge of the market, and I'll show you a quick image from Google Images here. This is what I'm going for, with the central market sign over the top and this sort of tiled appearance above those curved roofs. So I'm using these Cyrillic lettering props to create that lettering that you see on the sign there. And I'm thinking it's pretty much a good lookalike for how the central market entrance looked, at least back in the sort of mid-2000s, but it also equally looks good in a Soviet setting. And now I'm just going around cluttering the place up, because this is the informal economy, so it's not exactly going to be well ordered. Last thing I'm adding to this area are some wires and exposed pipes, and it's all about that realism from ground level. So when you look up, even though it's open air, it still feels a little bit crowded above the ground level. Anyway, time to leave the market and get out onto the promenade. At this point in the video, I'd like to say a big spasiba tovarish to Roman B for putting me onto all sorts of great footage from old Kaliningrad, whether it's from the 90s or mid-2000s. That piece of overhead footage, for instance, proved absolutely invaluable to me in creating this promenade, because the view from Google Maps is very unhelpful for this particular part of the city. Plus, it's been great to have the perspective of a real Kaliningrader on how things are going in Konstantinovsk. So, thanks again, Roman. Your help with this is much appreciated. In any case, I've just been laying down the networks of the promenade, so using the vanilla paths, the vanilla pavement paths to create the sort of structure of it. About to update them in just a second with some more ornate-looking tiled paths, because at this time period in 1980, this would have been a fairly new construction, this whole promenade area. And these paths are also terrain conforming, so I can lower them down and raise them up. In real life, this whole promenade is at a slightly lower elevation than Chernyakov Street, so I needed to have something that I could manipulate into being a very slightly lower elevation. And here I'm just laying down the 5-story Khrushchevkas that line the street, and there's been a glut of new Soviet Khrushchevka and Brezhnevka style buildings that have been uploaded to the workshop by Fantastic Vitaly, so really appreciate the timing with that. And here's another proper copy and paste job, a housing project that I've just laid down here. Like I said, I'm not going to show too much of that process because it is just copying and pasting, but you will see the finished product at the end in the cinematics. Patchwork of architecture is a phrase that I've used quite a few times now in this series to describe Kaliningrad, but I think it really applies here on Proletarian Street. I've used these French apartments here to represent old Königsberg buildings that had been rehabilitated and given a sort of Khrushchevka-style facade, but not quite getting it, if you see what I mean. Then I'm lining the rest of the street with the standard Khrushchevkas, but they follow the road a little bit more in these sort of twisting and turning patterns rather than the sort of 90-degree angles that you normally see. And in just a moment, I'm going to go back to the promenade and start working on the place that the Board of Honours sits on that you saw at the start of the video right here. And as you see, there is that slight dip in terrain from the street level down to the promenade. It's a very small difference. Probably could have just left it all at the same height, but the smallest difference is all the difference to me, and as always, the devil is in the details. So this promenade is bookended at one end by the Board of Honours and at the other end by this courthouse, which I'm using a couple of Helsinki buildings by Ion Wind, I think, on the workshop, and this little tank memorial. And I'm using the tank from the Tiergarten prop pack. It's the same kind of Soviet T-34 tank, exactly the same type that sits in Tiergarten, sits in this park in Kaliningrad. And it has these nice sort of curved walls that surround it like this. You'll see I'm going to sort of angle it facing backwards a little bit, so it looks like it's, you know, facing upwards. Unfortunately, aiming at the courthouse, make of that what you will. Maybe some kind of Serpico situation going on there.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. Feast your ears on that Spin Doctors mix.
But that would just be speculation. And all that remains for us to do here is to decorate the rest of this park. I'm putting down a few flags that I've created up there. I used the guide on the Steam Workshop by Toyota Land Cruiser. If you just search in the guides section of the Steam Workshop for a flag, then you should find it as the first entry. So that's that for the promenade and the tank memorial. But from commemorating one piece of history, I'd like us now to take an even bigger step into the past. This is Der Wrangelturm, part of the Königsberg city wall defences This particular tower was completed in 1856, at which time many of the old medieval city wall fortifications were being updated. So this was part of a big defensive overhaul for the city of Königsberg. And to create that, I am using a water tower from Vienna, I think it is. And I've used this model before for the exact opposite reason. I used it for the roof of that pavilion of the Eastern Fair that sits in the park behind the Lenin statue on Victory Square. And this time I'm getting rid of the roof, but using the outer walls, which from a shape and texture point of view make a pretty good lookalike for the Wrangel Tower. And I've mentioned on these episodes before, I think back in episode 1, that I've made a couple of passes at building Kaliningrad, or at least a sort of replica of it in the past. I haven't mentioned that even before that, I did attempt to do a medieval Cities Skylines and attempted to do medieval Königsberg. So in a way, doing these fortifications and city walls and things like that are a real blast from the past for me. And in a way, it's just like riding a bike, because I don't know how to do that either. Also, I went to look for some old screenshots of those medieval builds to put in here, but turns out I've deleted them all, so let that be a lesson about backing up. That Soviet cinema that you see on screen just there is meant to represent another Königsberg-era building that's called, and I have to be careful saying this, the Kunsthal, which is basically like an art gallery. Try saying that when you're drunk. In any case, that was another building that was damaged during the Second World War, but remained somewhat intact and received a bit of a Soviet facelift. And so that Soviet cinema probably best represents that particular building out of all of the buildings you could find on the workshop. In the 50s up until the 80s, it was used as a storage building, and from 1985 onwards, it was a school. Although not nowadays. Nowadays, it's just another part of the central market. I think in this era, in our Konstantinovsk timeline, it's going to be in the process of being re-equipped as a school. And here I'm just creating a couple of water outlets for the city wall, and I'm using this bridge that came as a part of the Citadel of Lille pack that the city walls also came from. Here I'm going to use the bridge as a sort of archway and then do that Wile E. Coyote tunnel trick with the square of asphalt there. You might notice in a moment that I've used quite a lot of rough-looking decals around the surroundings of the Wrangel Tower, like there, the big drain and the stains and the cracks in the concrete there. And that is kind of inspired by the reality of that particular location in Kaliningrad, because out of all of the city wall defenses, Der Wrangel is one of the least well maintained, and some would say best preserved, of the old Königsberg era fortifications. But here I've just been detailing the stream of water that acts as the moat around the Königsberg city walls, and it's kind of a practice run for me, because next episode I'll be getting on to detailing the upper and lower ponds, so that'll be a much bigger project than today's, which has mercifully turned out to be a much shorter episode than the ones I've been doing recently. But next month's, that's going to be another bumper edition with an intermission. Water towers in this episode have been doing quite a lot of heavy lifting. This one's a Polish water tower from the workshop, and I'm using that as the turrets to the gate that leads to Der Wrangel Tower. followed by that bridge from the Citadel of Lille pack as the frame of the gate. I quite like these projects where you have to sort of make do and mend with all sorts of different assets that really have no business being in the places that they are, but somehow when you put them all together it just works. Last part of this build, I'm creating a little inlet that drains water from the upper pond into the city moat, and using that old Wile E. Coyote trick once again. That'll be that for this section, but now all that remains to do is tidy up some details and get some people living in this area. See you in the next bit. Is that the ending music I hear? I think it is. So it's time to tie up some loose ends. First off, I've just finished lining the streets around the market area with some Khrushchevka buildings. Now I'm just linking up the area from the second episode that's just north of the central square with this area that we've been working on today, and that's a big series of taller 9-story housing blocks that go all the way along the lower pond down to the central square. Of course, with a big housing project, we do want to slightly follow the logic of a micro-district, and so we're placing this big school right in the middle. And this one's actually an East German Plattenbau school by Meister Monis on the workshop. Check out their page on the workshop. I'll put a link in the description. They've got some amazing East German DDR residential towers, education buildings, sports buildings, you name it, any size and shape that existed in the former DDR. Oh, and check out those animated swing sets just there in the park. Speaking of people to check out on the workshop, I'll pop a link to Sven Berlin's workshop page in the description as well. Their series of animated props and little scenes you can make in Cities Skylines, real game changer. It's really honestly heartening that the community of players of this game are the ones who are keeping it evolving, and it's a new game every few months. Honestly, when someone comes up with a new idea for like animated things or a complete overhaul of some of the systems that are in the original source code, it just seems to have an endless capacity to be improved upon. And it's funny because sometimes I see people saying things like, when's a Cities Skylines 2 coming out? And it's like, you don't really need a Cities Skylines 2. It's already Cities Skylines 4 at this point, just from the additions added by the community. So, I mean, I don't really think anyone could do as good of a job of it as the community does already, I guess. So, kudos. I mean, credit to the developers as well for creating an amazing base game and such a malleable source code. Anyway, I've been rambling there. What am I doing on screen? Okay, so I was just using one of Chris Brammer's Universam buildings and manipulating it with procedural objects to turn it into a sort of commercial base for one of the Khrushchevka buildings. Of course, we've already moved on from that now, and I'm just finishing off that line of 9-story buildings that go alongside the lower pond down towards the central square, bringing it back full circle, really, to episode 2. And of course, a lovely garden city like Konstantinovsk would be nothing without lovely tree-lined streets like this. But moving from the beautiful to the not-so-beautiful, the last thing I want to do in this episode is create a little building site. It's an odd-shaped building. In real life, it's a government office, and it sits at this sort of less than 30-degree acute angle on this corner here, just north of Der Wrangel. But in this state, it's going to be unfinished, and I'm just using these conveyors to sort of make a framework for it, and then creating an underground section as well, just for that extra dose of realism. But friends and comrades, we are getting very close to wrapping up here. At under half an hour, this will be the shortest episode that I've done so far for this series. But just because it's been the least time does not mean it has been any less enjoyable to make it for you. So that was episode 6 of Konstantinovsk 80. At 6 episodes in, I think I might just about be getting the hang of this now. And of course, any improvement in the quality of these videos has been down to you guys leaving me feedback in the comments, so please do keep your comments coming in. I always appreciate it, and so far it's been 100% helpful. Now, at the end of last episode, I mentioned something about maybe doing a bonus episode this month, if it was possible. And it turns out that it was possible. So what I'll say is keep your eyes peeled next week. I'm not sure what day yet, but so far I'm very proud of how it's turning out. But until then, take good care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.